Zarqa Nawaz does a little bit of myth busting about Islam and explores how two people can have different relationships to God depending on their life experiences. I discuss this and more on today's episode. Welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today it is a regular day, so I wanted to talk about an interesting book that I've read lately, one that I picked up from my local library at random. Don't forget to patronize your local libraries. They might have interesting books, even if they are sometimes average. You know, you're bound to find something interesting. And today's book is all about Islam and also being mistakenly accused for terrorism in a funny way. I am referring to Jameela Green Ruins Everything by Zarqa Nawaz, which was published in 2022. For those who don't know, Zarqa Nawaz is a Canadian author. I believe she's also Palestinian based on what I could find, but I don't know that 100% for sure, so if I am wrong, please correct me in the comments below. But she is a writer foremost, having written in a couple of books here and there. This is one of them, and there's another one which also has a similar sort of message about Islam and Muslim cultures and stuff like that. She's also a television producer. She had a hand in creating the two TV shows, one called Little Mosque on the Prairie, a reference to Little House on the Prairie, about a small Canadian town that has a mosque in it. Sounds interesting. I haven't seen it though. And then there's another one called Zarqa, which seems to be about her life, or maybe a fictionalized version of her life. It's about like a Muslim woman who discovers that her husband or that her ex is marrying a woman half his age, a white woman half his age, and sort of exploring that sort of thing. So a lot of what Zarqa writes focuses maybe on her own life or just the experience of Muslim women in general, trying to break down the sort of myths and perceptions of Muslim women as victims, which is partially what some of this book is about. And I haven't encountered any of her work before, but I am glad that I did that here. I said in the beginning that I found this at random, but I also kind of looked for something like this because I've been encountering a lot of random library reads from white authors, and I was just looking through the stacks to find something from an author of color, from a diverse author, and it was a big challenge, but I did manage to find this because I do want those diverse reads from, you know, around the perspective of the world rather than simply one sort of mindset, one sort of viewpoint of the world. And I feel like that's important to do. So without further ado, let's talk about this book. I will avoid spoiling it since it was published in the past couple of years, and I'll avoid doing that in the summary section, but I will maybe spoil a few things in the analysis section. So if you are interested in reading this, go out, find it, pick it up, and then come back and let's have a discussion about it. But yeah, without further ado, I'll do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and then I'll move on from there. So Jameela Green Ruins Everything focuses on the titular Jameela Green. She is a woman author trying to get on the New York Times bestseller list for her memoir. At the start of the story, we learned that she's a Muslim woman who's trying to, you know, change perspectives on how Muslim women are viewed in literature. And she's kind of interviewed by one of her friends from high school at a book signing. And the person asked, you know, why wasn't your brother featured in this story? He was a part of your life, and I know he died when you were younger. And Jameela just doesn't want to talk about that, so she moves on. And afterwards, we see her frustrated with God a little bit, wondering why God isn't really helping her get notoriety or anything like that. And so what she decides to do is she goes to her local North Dakota mosque and meets the imam named Ibrahim. who she asked how she can get God to help her get on the New York Times bestseller list. He's very confused by this. He's new to the country, and he notes that's not something you typically ask of God. But he decides, if you want to get noticed, maybe do something to help your fellow person. Go help a homeless person in the community. And together they work to help a man named Barkley, who they find. He notes that he's homeless because he's off his medications, and his employer fired him as a result. And he's also very open to Islam, and he even mentions that he wants to convert to that. But we later find out that he's actually been tricking Ibrahim and Jameela, that he's joined the terrorist organization known as DIC. I hope you like dick jokes. That's going to be a large part of this story. He's joined the terrorist organization, and he stole some money from the mosque. And so Ibrahim and Jameela go to the police, but they incidentally arrest Ibrahim because they view him as someone helping Barkley. And Ibrahim seems to go missing at that point, which has Jameela worried. And so she reaches out to a friend of her mother's, a man named Aziz, who is part of the Pakistani intelligence organization. And Aziz reveals that the American CIA has Ibrahim, but she can help him. She can help release Ibrahim if she plays along with something Aziz is trying to do. He wants to take down DIC and its leader, a man named Talal. And so if she helps him do that, he'll help get Ibrahim released. And so she doesn't really want to go to Pakistan or anything, but she decides to go along with this. Doesn't tell her husband or her daughter that she's going to Pakistan. And the U.S. media and government labels her as a terrorist as a result, which is a bit funny there. The DIC organization wants her to do an assassination, or do a suicide bombing in order to prove her loyalty, which she's a little bit worried about. She ends up having to go on a plane, and she's followed, but she ends up killing this person who would later try to assassinate her, which is a bit funny in the writing. Meanwhile, Ibrahim is tortured, but his torturer, a woman named Amina, who works for the CIA, reveals that she's actually the daughter of Talal, and she wants to infiltrate DIC with Ibrahim's help in order to take down Talal and potentially kill him. And meanwhile, still, Murray, Jameela's husband, and her daughter Lily learn that their mother has sort of joined this organization, and they go to Pakistan as well in an effort to find their mother. And the CIA works to get them infiltrated in DIC as well, which only Lily can do because they don't want Murray part of the group, since he's just a white Westerner. Unfortunately, Jameela is captured, and it's revealed that they've also captured Lily, and they want her to kill her mother in an effort to prove her loyalty to the group. Does that actually happen, and what other shenanigans ensue in the story? That is for you to find out. As I said, I would not spoil that here, but again, I might spoil that in the analysis section. In terms of analysis, Nawaz provides us with plenty to think about with this story. I do think it's a pretty middle-of-the-road story, all the themes that she's working with aren't as done as well as they could be, but there's still a little bit to think about there. One of the themes that she's working with here is that of the relationship to God. So Nawaz partially centers the story around Jameela and Ibrahim's feelings towards God. You see that through the between chapters in this story where because they're Muslim, they pray at different times of the day towards Mecca, I believe it is. That's what it is. And so you see them kind of talking about what's happening in the story and also asking different things of God. And so you see through that Jameela is frustrated and demanding and even kind of cynical towards God, not really sure that God exists, and also saying, if you want me to support you, you have to make this happen. And a lot of that goes back to her brother Jamal, who was murdered by a hitchhiker, or as it's later revealed in the story, he was murdered by a white supremacist who was targeting Muslims at the time. And so that death really hurt Jameela, and so as a result, her faith's kind of been shaken. She believes in God, but it's a very difficult kind of relationship, and one that you don't always see with Muslim individuals. And then you also see Ibrahim's relationship to God in this story. He's very hopeful, kind of literal in his translation, but willing to adapt. He's seeking answers from God because he's kind of confused a lot of the time. He has a lot of faith, and that does get shaken throughout the story, but it's still persistent. And you see very much how these two are opposed in this story, with Ibrahim really trying to work with Jameela to strengthen her belief in God. And Jameela even kind of saying, Ibrahim, you're a little too trustworthy with God. You got to make some things happen on your own. There is a good quote that gets at these differences that I'd like to read to you. God doesn't abandon people like you. Me, maybe. But you've done your time in the holy trenches, praying and believing. You're too good for God to abandon. Indicating, that's coming from Jameela, indicating that she believes that, Ibrahim is pure and he doesn't give up his faith, whereas Jameela has bigger struggles, and she's felt that God has abandoned her by this point, especially given all of that's happening in the story with her being sort of kidnapped by a terrorist organization. And so, you kind of see the difference between the two, and also how this ordeal is slowly strengthening Jameela's faith, not only in God but also in her fellow Muslim, and her fellow Arab, and her fellow Islam supporter. So it's helping to further make her a believer in God, I think is what I'm getting at. This story is just about a person's journey toward God, as it is about Jameela's overall development and sort of busting these myths about the Muslim culture. As I've been mentioning, a lot of this is about busting myths about the Muslim culture. You see that Nawaz is trying to talk about the real Islam here. Nawaz is trying to bust those myths throughout the story, the perceptions of what Islam truly is, and how it's changed based on the U.S.'s interaction, or Western culture's interaction with the religion. And you see that by Nawaz mentioning how the CIA trained bin Laden and helped develop him into the later terrorist that he would become, how jihads were developed by Western cultures, sort of writing books about what jihads were, and then distributing them to elementary schools in Middle Eastern countries, and how the idea of the modern jihad was created by Western cultures. And so you kind of create your own enemy in that regard in order to further justify exploiting them and doing harmful things to them. And then you see white terrorism going unreported, how a lot of violence is done toward Islamic people in America, and how the FBI focuses more on Muslims than they do on those people who are actually causing harm, which is a problem that we see in modern America with the rise of the Proud Boys and the resurgence of the KKK and other similar groups. And then the U.S. invasions of those countries, where they invade and they want a hand at rebuilding the country, but they don't rebuild it in a way that is sustainable. They rebuild it in a manner resembling Western cultures, which doesn't always work for Middle Eastern cultures, and just results in further uprising of terrorist groups, of these freedom fighters who want more control of the country. And there are other sources who are responsible for the Arab world's woes. There's often this view that Muslims are creating their own problems, but if you constantly have U.S. intervention in these places, Western intervention in these places, of course there's going to be problems, and it's going to look like it's the Muslims who are causing those problems. But that's only because you don't get that full picture, because it's happening slowly and over time. And what's really interesting is the end of the story, where you see that Jameela is trying to resolve this because they try to make her the caliph of the Dick movement, the caliph of Syria at the end of the story. And she's like, no, but I can help you try to rebuild your country. And the way that she does that is by excluding the United States from rebuilding, because they want a hand in helping Syria rebuild after the Dick organization has been dismantled. And instead she's relying on the media, and especially social media, to say, no, we are responsible for ourselves. Let us handle this ourselves, and be supportive of each other. Otherwise, greater problems might arise if you try to take control of everything here. And it's a very interesting sort of message that Arabs and Muslims can be responsible, self-determinant of their own country, and have success for themselves. But it does also feel a bit on the nose, where a lot of the times the characters will just come out and say this thing about what the United States did, in a way that doesn't sound like the way people actually speak. It just feels like she's just dropping this line there, which is interesting. Oftentimes things I didn't know, but it would feel more at place in a nonfiction story rather than this fictional narrative here. It just feels a little bit out of place. Nawaz is also using humor here. A lot of this humor stems from satire of, those traditional terrorist stories of women being seen as, or Muslim women being seen as victims in their own narratives, whereas the satire kind of flips it on its head and shows that Jameela is causing a lot of her own problems, but also Jameela is causing problems for other people. And she's accidentally being labeled as a terrorist through a comedy of errors. I really like the chapter on the airplane in this story, where she's kind of fighting it out with an assassin who wants to kill her for trying to infiltrate this group, and they're trying to fight without the stewardesses noticing them, and then as the assassin tries to kill her, she finds out that she's actually injected a poison needle into him, and so he ends up dying. And she's like, "Oh well, I guess that's how that goes." It's a very, very funny and silly kind of story, but I do think that Nawaz tries to balance two different tones in this story. Like, there's this serious part of the story where she reflects on the loss of her brother and the difficulties in interacting with her family, and then that's immediately kind of glossed over by the humor that she's trying to do in this silly story where she accidentally joins a terrorist organization. Very far-fetched story, and I feel like these two tones don't match, and so it kind of creates a jarring narrative. Where am I supposed to take this seriously? Because I kind of don't. This is too silly for me to take seriously. And one of the characters even notes that, where they're like, "It feels like I've gone from Bambi to the Fast and the Furious," and that feels like a very apt description of the story. Like, it feels like she's trying to have this humor and satire, but she's also trying to discuss her brother, and trying to sort of note the issues that Muslim cultures have dealt with, and it doesn't really mesh well. It comes off as contradictory in some ways, and I feel like the story best thrives when she just forgoes all of that and just creates the most silly, outlandish story possible. Digging into the weird and having a character just sort of be named the new leader of a terrorist organization that is trying to reform itself now. I think it really works that way, and not so much the serious way. And related to that, it does feel like some plot threads are barely addressed. Again, the story of Jamal, her brother, it just feels like it's mentioned throughout the story without any attention actually paid to it for Jameela to focus on and think about and become a better person about. And it just feels like it's kind of put to the side. And then related to that, her relationship with her parents feels like Nawaz wanted to talk more about that, but just didn't focus, or didn't have enough time to focus on that. This story might have benefited from being a little bit longer, in my opinion. It does feel a little bit too short and just glosses over a lot of that, but I feel like if she focused on that, it couldn't have been the satire, and it might not have worked as well. So I kind of understand why some of these are barely addressed, but at the same time, it undermines the story a little bit to introduce these ideas and then barely develop them. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Jameela Green Ruins Everything by Zarqa Nawaz. A pretty fun, if middle of the road type story. It's certainly not one of the best ones that I read, but it's far from the worst. It's a very good library read, in that I didn't pay for it, but I checked it out and I had a good time, and it made me laugh a little bit. So I think that's often the most that you can ask from stories. If it made me laugh, then it had had the artistic impression that it should have had. So pretty interesting. I recommend this if you can find it at your local library. But otherwise, if you have any thoughts on my review here, or anything to say about the book, let me know in your comments below. Would love to hear from you. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this author or this book if they don't already know about it. Also join the Discord if you want to have further conversations about books, movies, or other forms of media. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and terrorist organization travels. Farewell.